Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. And as I've said previously, I wish you safety for you and your family. And I just urge you to take every precaution because this is a completely extraordinary moment in the lives of mankind. I did an interview with GBS Kenya, focused more on the Kenya ramifications of the COVID-19. There are bits of it where it's difficult to hear because I did it from here and the internet at times was not that great, but have a listen if you want a more focused conversation around the situation here in Kenya, and actually it probably applies to Africa as a whole. Macro thoughts. The coronavirus is now killing the equivalent of one Pearl Harbor, 2,400 deaths every day. This is expected to continue to increase. This is from Zorina Q. 50,649 new cases of COVID-19 yesterday, and 2,382 deaths were reported in the last 24 hours. Both are record high figures. And secondly, another chart from Zorina Q, today's charts of coronavirus and deaths. Cases multiply by 10 every 14 days. Deaths multiply by 10 every 13 days. And I don't want to be macabre, but it's likely deaths accelerate because a lot of hospital capacity is now maxed out. It is an extraordinary situation, and it's very, very multiplicative and non-linear and exponential. The Horse Cure, Aidan Hartley, who's a friend and an author, tweeted, "A black swan for you on the Serpentine, Ali Khan." And to wit, the virus is not correlated to endogenous market dynamics, but is an exogenous uncertainty that remains unresolved, and therefore it is a black swan. This is an early look at the front page of the first edition of the New York Times for March 27, 2020. Have a look at this chart from Tavi Costa. October 1929, the S&P plunged 34% in a month. In the next 2 days, a wild relief rally of 18% followed. Then stocks plunged another 26% in the next 13 days. And he concludes, eerie resemblance. And indeed, what are we doing today? So we've had this fantastic rally rebound, but this is what rallies look like in a bear market. And I, for one, am not buying into it. In fact, I'd like to sell it right now. 22nd of March, I wrote about the COVID-19 and a rolling sudden stop. Policymakers still believe in their linear minds that more free money, more rate cuts will resuscitate the patient, which is like a patient etherized on the table. The Dow just climbed out of a bear market it entered 2 weeks ago. That speaks to the tenuousness of market conventions in times of extreme volatility. D. Martino Booth, the biggest rally since 1933, helped push the gauge up the requisite 20% from Monday's low, meeting the definition of a bull market. And then I like this from hipster_trader, seeing everyone bullish now. Gold, about which I have the strongest conviction, is currently trading at 624.50. 22nd of March, I reiterated my buy recommendation. And I said on the 22nd of March, I still believe gold will soon turn viral to the upside, and I'm looking for more than $2,000. And partly informed by the print shop. This is from Scott Burke 777. And we're going into a massive phase of money printing. And that is always supportive of gold. My timing was wrong because on the 24th of February, I said the viral moment has arrived. At this point, I would venture gold is correlated to the coronavirus, which is set to turn parabolic and is already non-linear and exponential. And of course, then we had an enormous margin call, which took us far below where I expected, and it was like holding on to a roller coaster. But hold on, I did. Home Thoughts, Albert Camus. Interestingly, I found this book in the Muthaiga Library, which is now closed, I think, for the first time in its more than 100-year history, and only one person had taken it out before me in the last 20 years, La Peste, Albert Camus, whose book L'Étranger made such a big impact on me when I did it for O-level. In this respect, our townsfolk were like everybody else, wrapped up in themselves. In other words, they were humanists. They disbelieved in pestilences. A pestilence isn't a thing made to man's measure. Therefore, we tell ourselves that pestilence is a mere bogey of the mind, a bad dream that will pass away. But it doesn't always pass away, and from one bad dream to another, it is men who pass away, and the humanists first of all, because they have taken no precautions. And then another quote from a passage where they're all crammed into a church. For a long while God gazed down on this town with eyes of compassion, but he grew weary of waiting. His eternal hope was too long deferred, and now he has turned his face away from us, and so God's light's withdrawn. We walk in darkness, in the thick darkness of this plague. And then return to the Black Swan from the Serpentine in Aidan Hartley. And that took me back to my end-of-year commentary when I said it certainly feels like a decade of semiotic arousal when everything, it seemed, was a sign, a harbinger of some future radical disjuncture or cataclysmic upheaval. Paris, France, it has been almost 4 years since I took this picture in La Sainte-Chapelle, C.S. Dickey. That took me back to John Donne. Each man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind. Therefore send not to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Tomorrow is a coin toss, next week is a wild guess, this year is a shot in the dark, the next 5 years we feel good about, the long run we feel great about, the motley fool. The zeitgeist of a time is its defining spirit or its mood, and the zeitgeist of 2020 is simply indescribable. And on that note, I follow a gentleman called A.A. Olomi, who's a professor, I believe, of Islamic theology. And he's got a tweet, a thread on the angel of death, which sums up the zeitgeist. Belief in angels is a major article of faith in Islam, messengers and servants of God. One such angel is the angel of death. Though referenced directly in the Quran, much of the law comes from later Muslim writings. While referenced in the Quran directly, he is not named. Muslims know him as Azrael, and in eschatological works he is treated as a power second only to God himself. He is described as having 4 wings and countless eyes. He is so vast that the whole world is said to be like a coin or bowl in his hands. The world rests between his feet. So mighty is he that when God first created him, he covered him in thousands of veils. Then he created and gathered the other angels and told them to look upon the figure. God cast off the veils, and the angels beheld Azrael. They promptly collapsed. Minor traditions even claim he carries a spear with poisonous attributes. Another tradition says he has 4 faces, each responsible for taking the souls of prophets, humans, jinn, and beasts. He is said to reside in either the 2nd, the 4th, or 7th heaven, and is one of the angels Muhammad meets on his night journey. In one description, he sits under a mighty tree with a great book or tablet in his hands, upon which everyone's name is written. All his eyes are affixed to the tree, though with the names of all mortals. 40 days before a person's allotted time, their leaf will fall, signaling the angel of death. He then turns his eyes upon the book as ink from the throne of God drops onto it. If the ink is black or green, then the person is a wretch. If it is white, they are righteous. This determines which of his helper angels he sends. Those who take souls gently or by force. These are the Naziat and the Nashitat. All mortals are born in the shadow of death. When God wished to create Adam, he sent out the angels to collect the dirt of the earth. Israel brought back dirt, some say the dirt of the grave, and so all humans are born with the seeds of the grave already within them. They can travel all the world, but will always return to the true womb, the earth. Daily the grave is said to call to us all, what preparations have you made? Until finally Israel comes. In another interesting tale, it is said when death appeared before Moses, the prophet slapped him and refused to die. And so now Israel comes like a shadow in the night. Despite his fearsome reputation, Israel is a blessing and a mercy in Islam. To the wicked he may appear terrifying, but the righteous welcome the relief he brings. He takes their souls with a salam and therefore greets them with peace. He takes the soul from the mouth and eyes, bringing ease to the pangs of life and suffering. And then he describes the inevitability of death is described in 2 famous stories, of which I'll share one with you. One day, Azrael was visiting the court of King Solomon, where he saw a youth. He stared hard at the youth, causing the young man to quiver in terror. The youth rushed to King Solomon and begged, "Majesty, quickly summon the winds to transport me far to India, for death has given me a strange look." Solomon did as requested. A few minutes later, he called Israel over. "O angel of death, why did you stare at my servant so?" Israel replied, "I was surprised to see him, for I am supposed to take his soul in India shortly, and yet here he was. So I suppose that chimes with the current zeitgeist. Each man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind, therefore send not to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. And definitely that defines our zeitgeist, which is simply indescribable at the moment. Political reflections. We are at war with the virus and not winning it. It took the world 3 months to reach 100,000 confirmed COVID-19 cases. The next 100,000 happened in just 12 days. The third took 4 days. The fourth just 1.5. Antonio Guterres describing exponential propagation. Tomorrow, i.e. today, we should cross the 400,000 mark for active cases worldwide. That's Remy GMI, who's also a tremendous resource. The USA is now the #1 country that has the most COVID-19 cases. The US reached 81,999 cases across the country, surpassing China and Italy. And that definitively is the Malcolm Gladwell moment right there. The Atlantic has a fantastic article about how the pandemic will end. It's a long read. 3 months ago, no one knew that SARS-CoV-2 existed. Now the virus has spread to almost every country, infecting at least 446,000 people whom we know about, and many more whom we do not. It has disrupted modern society on a scale that most living people have never witnessed. Bill Gates has been telling anyone who would listen, including his 18 million viewers of his TED Talk. In 2018, I wrote a story for The Atlantic arguing that America was not ready for the pandemic that would eventually come. In October, the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security wargamed what might happen if a new coronavirus swept the globe, and then one did. Hypotheticals become reality. What if became now what? We realized that her child might be one of the first of a new cohort who are born into a society profoundly altered by COVID-19. We decided to call them Generation C. A report card that grades every country on its pandemic preparedness. The United States has a score of 83.5, the world's highest. Rich, strong, developed. America is supposed to be the readiest of nations. That illusion has been shattered despite months of advance warning as the virus spread in other countries. When America was finally tested by COVID-19, it failed. More transmissible and fatal than seasonal influenza, the new coronavirus is also stealthier, spreading from one host to another for several days before triggering obvious symptoms. To contain such a pathogen, nations must develop a test and use it to identify infected people, isolate them, and trace those they've had contact with. That is what South Korea, Singapore, and Hong Kong did to tremendous effect. It is what the United States did not. In a crucial month when the American caseload shot into the tens of thousands, only hundreds of people were tested. I'm not aware of any simulations that I or others have run where we considered a failure of testing, says Alexandra Phelan of Georgetown University, who works on legal and policy issues related to infectious diseases. The testing fiasco was the original sin of America's pandemic failure, the single flaw that undermined every other countermeasure. Partly that's because of the White House, which is a ghost town of scientific expertise, don't we know? The US may end up with the worst outbreak in the industrialized world. COVID-19 is a slow and long illness. People who were infected several days ago will only start showing symptoms now. Numbers are now starting to rise exponentially. As of Wednesday morning, the official case count was 54,000, and the actual case count is unknown. Unable to treat or save everyone, doctors have been forced into the unthinkable, rationing care to patients who are most likely to survive while letting others die. The US has fewer hospital beds per capita than Italy. A study released by a team at Imperial College London concluded that if the pandemic is left unchecked, those beds will all be full by late April. By the end of June, for every available critical care bed, there will be roughly 15 COVID-19 patients in need of one. By the end of the summer, the pandemic will have directly killed 2.2 million Americans, notwithstanding those who will indirectly die, as hospitals are unable to care for the usual slew of heart attacks, strokes, and car accidents. This is the worst case scenario. To avert it, 4 things need to happen, and quickly. Hubei province in China, the epicenter of the pandemic, was also a manufacturing center of medical masks. One day we'll wake up to a story of doctors in City X who are operating with bandanas and a closet in City Y with masks piled into it. This agency can also coordinate the second pressing need, a massive rollout of COVID-19 tests. Those tests have been slow to arrive because of 5 separate shortages of masks to protect people administering the tests, of nasopharyngeal swabs for collecting viral samples, of extraction kits for pulling the virus's genetic material out of the samples, of chemical reagents that are part of those kits, and trained people who can give the tests. On March 6, Trump said that anyone who wants a test can get a test. That was, and still is, untrue, and his own officials were quick to correct him. Group A includes everyone involved in the medical response, whether that's treating patients, running tests, or manufacturing supplies. Group B includes everyone else, and their job is to buy Group A more time. Group B must now flatten the curve by physically isolating themselves from other people to cut off chains of transmission. Given the slow fuse of COVID-19 to forestall the future collapse of the healthcare system, these seemingly drastic steps must be taken immediately before they feel proportionate, and they must continue for several weeks. Trump has repeatedly played down the problem, telling America that we have it very well under control when we do not, and that cases were going down to close to zero when they were rising. In some cases, as with his claims about ubiquitous testing, his misleading gaffes have deepened the crisis. He has even touted unproven medications. Fauci has advised every president since Reagan on new epidemics, and now sits on the COVID-19 task force that meets with Trump roughly every other day. He's got his own style, let's leave it at that, Fauci told me. But any recommendation that I've made thus far, the substance of it, he has listened to everything. Trump already seems to be wavering. In recent days, he's signaled that he's prepared to backtrack on social distancing policies in a bid to protect the economy. Pundits and business leaders have used similar rhetoric, arguing that high-risk people, such as the elderly, could be protected while low-risk people are allowed to go back to work. Such thinking is seductive but flawed. It overestimates our ability to assess a person's risk and to somehow wall off the high-risk people from the rest of society. It underestimates how badly the virus can hit low-risk groups and how thoroughly hospitals will be overwhelmed if even just younger demographics are falling sick. A recent analysis from the University of Pennsylvania estimated that even if social distancing measures can reduce infection rates by 95%, 960,000 Americans will still need intensive care. There are only about 180,000 ventilators in the US, and more pertinently, only enough respiratory therapists and critical care staff to safely look after 100,000 ventilated patients. Abandoning social distancing would be foolish. Abandoning it now when tests and protective equipment are still scarce would be catastrophic. Even a perfect response won't end the pandemic. As long as the virus persists somewhere, there's a chance that one infected traveler will reignite fresh sparks in countries that have already extinguished their fires. This is already happening in China, Singapore, and other Asian countries that briefly seem to have the virus under control. Under these conditions, there are three possible endgames: one that's very unlikely, one that's very dangerous, and one that's very long. The odds of worldwide synchronous control seem vanishingly small. The second is that the virus does what past flu pandemics have done. It burns through the world and leaves behind enough immune survivors that it eventually struggles to find viable hosts. The herd immunity scenario would be quick and thus tempting. That's what's going to happen in Africa. But it would also come at a terrible cost. SARS-CoV-2 is more transmissible and fatal than flu, and it would likely leave behind many millions of corpses and a trail of devastated health systems. The third scenario is that the world plays a protracted game of whack-a-mole with the virus, stamping out outbreaks here and there until a vaccine can be produced. This is the best option, but also the longest and the most complicated. Even if it works, they don't have any easy way to manufacture it at a massive scale. This is regarding vaccines, and there's a lot of complexity and there's a big time lag in getting to that. Aftermath, as my colleague Annie Lowry wrote, the economy is experiencing a shock more sudden and severe than anyone alive has ever experienced. About 1 in 5 people in the United States have lost working hours or jobs. Hotels are empty, airlines are grounding flights, restaurants and other small businesses are closing. Inequalities will widen. Diseases have destabilized citizens' societies many times over, but it hasn't happened in this country in a very long time, or to quite the extent that we're seeing now. Hugs, handshakes, and other social rituals are now tinged with danger. Americans resolved to not live in fear, but SARS-CoV-2 has no interest in their terror, only their cells. The COVID-19 pandemic, by contrast, is affecting everyone directly, changing the nature of everyday life. That distinguishes it not only from other diseases, but also from the other systemic challenges of our times. When an administration prevaricates on climate change, the effects won't be felt for years. Even then, will be hard to pass. It's different when a president says that everyone can get a test, and one day later, everyone cannot. Pandemics are democratizing experiences. People whose privilege and power would normally shield them from a crisis are facing quarantines, testing positive, losing loved ones, senators are falling sick. The lessons that America draws from this experience are hard to predict, especially at a time when online algorithms and partisan broadcasters only serve news that aligns with their audience's preconceptions. Such dynamics will be pivotal in the coming months. The transitions after World War II or 9/11 were not about a bunch of new ideas. The ideas are out there, but the debates will be more acute over the next few months because of the fluidity of the moment and the willingness of the American public to accept big, massive changes. Time Traveler of the Year is being told that he's got to come back for the year 2020 and his reaction. What's certain is that the whole global economy has been hit by an insidious, literally invisible circuit breaker. Bill Gates' coronavirus has started behaving a lot like the once-in-a-century pathogen we've been worried about. New York Governor Cuomo, who now looks like a candidate for the presidency, facts are empowering, even when the facts are discouraging. Not knowing the facts is worse. I promise that I will continue to give New Yorkers all the facts, not selective facts. That takes me back to my last article when I was quoting Jenna Friedman, who said a reality TV star botched the response to a global pandemic, and now we are all imprisoned in our homes and forced to watch him daily. His White House briefings are a monstrous joke of sycophancy. The Tsinghua University professor Zhu Zhangrun said this about the CCP. What is thriving, however, is all that ridiculous red culture and nauseating adulation that the system heaps on itself via shameless pro-party hacks who chirrup hosannas at every turn. The professor could equally have been speaking about the Trump White House. The virus may be the most dangerous adversary America has ever faced. It's like the US was invaded, tweeted Balagas. The normal defenses fail, it can't be bombed, bank accounts can't be frozen, unbreakable morale, no supply chain, lives off the land, infinite reinforcements, fully decentralized. I previously had wrote a non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine in point of fact. Breaking views, leadership is once again being redefined, the incompetents are being exposed nakedly by the virus-ebbed tide. One thing is certain, after weeks, perhaps months of lockdown, layoffs and lower net worth, Americans' views about what sort of leader they want at the helm won't be the same as it is today. Trump already appears to be the wrong man at the wrong time. The only thing that will matter was who stepped up to the coronavirus and won. Northman Trader, they're totally winging it. There are exercises in marketing and efforts at confidence building. Nobody knows anything. Indeed, world economists and policymakers are flummoxed, and Trump as well, by the exponential, multiplicative nature of COVID-19. US unemployment claims surged to 3.2 million, quadrupling the 1982 record. And indeed, the viral moment has arrived. People are dying 72 hours inside a New York hospital battling coronavirus. This is a New York Times video. And indeed, the virus is not correlated to endogenous market dynamics, but is an exogenous uncertainty that remains unresolved, and therefore it is a black swan. As I said in my last article, we're moving from a world of hyper-connectedness to a world of quarantine. A complete quarantine is the only way to vaccine this 21st century world of ours. Dr. Fauci, you don't make the timeline. The virus makes the timeline. I wrote in depth on the 1st of March about the origin of the coronavirus, and I said if they can get you asking the wrong questions, they don't have to worry about the answers. That's Thomas Pynchon. Then Don DeLillo, there's always more to it. This is what history consists of. It is the sum total of the things they aren't telling us. A paranoid is someone who knows a little of what's going on, William Burroughs. I came across a fantastic article via Scott Burke 777. When it comes to written pieces, there is a predominance of scientific literature and other forms of writing that were produced to disapprove the conspiracy theory. And then he's analyzing and doing a comparison. One can see that the Wuhan coronavirus is about 86% identical to the SARS coronavirus, which caused a pandemic back in 2003. This level of sequence identity basically says that the Wuhan coronavirus could not have come from SARS, something the field agrees unanimously. At the same time, the Wuhan coronavirus is strangely similar to two bat coronaviruses, ZC45 and ZX21. Overall, the sequence of either of the two bat coronaviruses is 95% identical to the Wuhan coronavirus. The E protein in particular is 100% identical. The nucleocapsid is 94% identical. The membrane protein is 98.6% identical. the S2 portion, second half of the spike protein, is 95% identical. However, when it comes to the S1 portion, first half of the spike protein, the sequence identity suddenly drops to 69%. This pattern of sequence conservation between either of the closely related bat coronaviruses and the Wuhan coronavirus is extremely rare and strange. Extremely rare because natural evolution typically takes place when changes, mutations occur randomly across the whole genome. You would then expect the rate of mutation being more or less the same for all parts of the genome. It is what is called recombination. We would defer to the next section to explain why recombination is also practically impossible in this case. Spike proteins are located here for reasons beyond decoration. They are actually the key that coronaviruses use to open the lock so that viruses can enter our host cells. Figure 2 shows the structure of the spike protein of the SARS virus. Such structure images are as real as photos of actual people. Given the sequence similarity conservation here, the spike protein of the Wuhan coronavirus would look pretty much the same, which is indeed confirmed by a recent publication. 3 spike proteins have to come together to function properly as the key. This 3-protein assembly is what's called a trimer. To form this trimer, you would need the blue portion of the spike protein, which is referred to as S2 of spike. This S2 can be regarded as the part of the key that you hold with your fingers. It does not actually go into the lock. However, for this key to work, S2 has to be there and to preserve the ability of forming trimers. The other half of spike, the red portion, or what is referred to as S1, is responsible for binding the host receptor. S1 can be considered as the portion of the key that literally enters the lock. It has to fit precisely to the delicate shape of the lock host receptor so that the door opening action can be accomplished. Whether or not a particular lock can be opened by a specific key is decided exclusively by this S1 part of spike. In other words, S1 of the coronavirus dictates which host or cells the virus can infect. Now you may be able to appreciate what I call extremely strange. While everything else of the Wuhan coronavirus remains almost identical to the 2 bat coronaviruses, the S1 portion, which dictates which host a coronavirus targets, has changed significantly from the 2 bat coronaviruses to the Wuhan coronavirus. You will also see below how this segment, known to be unique to the SARS spike and sufficient for its interaction with human ACE2, is practically copied over by the Wuhan coronavirus. The difference in the front half, or the S1 portion, now if you look at the top 4 sequences, the 2 Wuhan coronaviruses and 2 bat coronaviruses, you can see that they are largely the same across the S1 half of spike. Only a couple of places are different. However, the details of these differences and the way the human and the bat viruses differ from each other here in S1, in my and many other people's minds, practically spell out the origin of the Wuhan coronavirus. It is created by people, not by nature. This segment contains everything needed for human ACE2 interaction. Here it seems that this critical piece was copied from the SARS spike protein and then pasted into a bat coronavirus. There are, of course, differences between these two, which may make it seem unlikely a direct copy and paste. For the 2 bat coronaviruses here, given how they lack many of the key residues, what is marked by red sticks in figure 3, for binding ACE2, it is easy to predict that these 2 bat viruses would not be able to infect a human. The Wuhan coronavirus, while being identical to their bat relatives, ZC45 and ZXC21, everywhere else, has somehow inherited the critical short piece from SARS spike to replace the incompetent piece in the bat coronavirus spike. As a result of this miraculous replacement in S1, all key residues preserved, many non-essential residues changed, the Wuhan coronavirus has practically acquired the ability to infect humans something its closest bat relatives do not have. Here, only the Wuhan coronavirus contains an additional SPRRA. Note that no beta coronaviruses except this new Wuhan coronavirus contain such a furin cleavage site. In other words, there is no evidence that Mother Nature has made any beta coronavirus carrying such a furin cleavage site. Therefore, a sequence identity of 69% for the S portion of spike protein is simply insane. The S1 of Wuhan coronavirus could not have originated from the S1 of a bat coronavirus. On top of that, because furin cleavage site has not been observed in any beta coronaviruses so far, the chance that the furin cleavage site in the Wuhan coronavirus was obtained through recombination with another furin cleavage site containing coronavirus is therefore extremely low. Now, what are the chances for both of these next to impossible recombination events to take place? No chance. The Wuhan coronavirus cannot be coming from nature. To put it in plainer words, no physical proof for the existence of this RATG13 virus. She has only its sequence information, which is nothing but a string of letters alternating between A, T, G, and C. Well worth reading because he really explains it. Figure 1, this is a coronavirus particle with spike proteins decorating its surface. Figure 2, structure of the SARS spike protein and how it binds to the human ACE2 receptor. Figure 3, sequence alignment of the spike proteins from relevant coronaviruses, including viruses isolated from the current pandemic. Region marked by orange lines is the segment important for interaction with human receptor ACE2. Crucial residues for interaction are additionally highlighted by a red stick on top. China reportedly sells Spain 640,000 COVID-19 test kits that don't work, according to El País. If test kits sold by China to others are not working, any reason to assume that test kits used by China internally are working? Questions raid China's statistics. The truck pictured in this cake sin piece delivers 2,500 urns filled with cremated people in a single run. This is its second run of the day, Howard French. Quote, "You will all be no better than fields of garlic chives, giving yourselves up to being harvested by the blade of power, time and time again. Groucho Marx, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? Let me tell you, world, I do not believe. If 1,000 challenges lie beneath your feet, count me as number 1,001. I don't believe the sky is blue. I don't believe in thunder's echoes. I don't believe that dreams are false. I don't believe that death has no revenge." I take you back to an article I came across in Reddit. I know the truth about the coronavirus outbreak. It is far worse than the media are telling you. I was one of those tasked to manage the fallout of the contamination. Of course, we could not keep such a huge undertaking secret, so we decided to order our state media to report that a coronavirus had broken out in Wuhan. Within a week, there were so many corpses that we did not know what to do with them. So we ordered the surviving social credit prisoners to drive the bodies into the countryside and bury them in mass graves. It became clear that the agent was entirely beyond our control. It was spreading like wildfire throughout Hubei province and beyond, infecting tens of millions and causing them all to die. The agent is far, far more contagious than that, and its fatality rate, unlike the coronavirus, is not 2%. Nobody recovers from it. Everybody who contracts it dies, and a lot of people are contracting it. Hubei province lies in ruins. There was one more set of doors, and beyond them lay what the corporal called the core. And it was there that I saw it, piles and piles of dead bodies stacked on top of one another, all the way to the ceiling. The corporal led me to the core. I cannot count how many there were, but it was many, many thousands, and in the midst of the pile of corpses was a kind of path, and I heard a roaring in the distance. I simply could not believe what lay at the end of that path in the core. It was an enormous furnace with great fires roaring within. Now, Jennifer TNTD at Wuchang Funeral Home, Wuhan, family members of the dead collect ashes. The funeral home promises to give out 500 urns per day and will try to give them all out before the Qingyang Festival, April 4. The number is already more than 6,000 and from just one. I take you back to Intel.wave. Current SO2 levels are extremely elevated at 1700 M3, sulfur oxide, normally used for burning bodies, an indication of bodies. Some striking analysis here out of Wuhan, estimating 97,000 dead in China from COVID, based on crematorium urn distribution, would be 25 times the official tolls, if anywhere close to accurate. Scott Burke 777. How many people died in Wuhan and China? Conservative estimation based on numbers of urns being given out at 8 crematoriums in Wuhan. Total death 59,000, total death in China 97,000, total infection 1.21 million. My model has it higher. Bill Gates, until we get the number of cases in the country down to small numbers, where we can be doing testing and isolation against those small numbers. This is an interview with Anderson Cooper. He said, coronavirus has started behaving a lot like that once-in-a-century pathogen we've been worried about. This is kind of the nightmare scenario, said Bill Gates. International markets, as I said, a V-shaped recovery is a fantasy. What's certain is that the whole global economy has been hit by an insidious, literally invisible circuit breaker. When it comes to this lending, we're not going to run out of ammunition. That doesn't happen, said Chairman Powell. He's going to print like a maniac. Policymakers, I said, still believe in their linear minds that more free money, more rate cuts will resuscitate the patient. But we're headed to a sudden hard stop, as I said in my last article. Claims quarterly time period, not a bad tick, Tommy Thornton. Currency markets. Euro dollar 110.18, dollar index 99, Japanese yen 108.90, Swiss franc 0.9602, the pound, what a rebound, 121.89, the Australian dollar 0.6064, India rupee 74.895, South Korean won 12.1066, Brazilian real 502.42, Egyptian pound 15.7518, and the South African rand 17.321. Dollar index chart, this is from Rich Economics, and you can see we've started to come down as the market prices in an avalanche of free money. In recent days, some of the most battered down industries like airlines, hotels and cruise liners, all those involved in the hyper-connected world, have been rebounding. Let's see how long that lasts. That chart's from J.S. Blockland. As I said, this is a rolling sudden stop. We are moving from a world of hyper-connectedness to a world of quarantine, a complete quarantine, and therefore the price of crude oil, in my view, is perfectly correlated to that sudden stop. We're currently at $23.55. Sub-Saharan Africa, as I've said previously, we're looking in the rear view mirror when we're looking at our numbers. Total of confirmed cases of yesterday was 1,808, 216 new confirmed cases across 15 countries in the region, but these numbers are going to turn exponential. Tests per 100,000 people, you can see the problem for Africa. This is from Jody Graphics. Burundi is the only country in Africa with no confirmed case of COVID-19. When the health minister was asked what was the secret, he said it was very simple. We do not have any coronavirus testing kit. We are hungry. Protesters oppose COVID-19 lockdown of Bogota. That's a problem coming to near you and me probably. I calculate Sub-Saharan Africa will contract in 2020. It would not be an exaggeration to say that we're staring into the abyss of a zombie apocalypse, I wrote. My friend got in Addis yesterday night and shared with me the quarantine measures at the airport and her experience. This is Martin Holly. 7 hours passed with no solution. Reps had to leave because it was 6 p.m. People were crying. It was a mess, but no officials came to calm the madness. And Fly Ethiopian kept saying skylight or no leaving the airport. Those who couldn't afford were put in line outside the airport for an hour to be taken to Bole High School with no further information on the situation. Is there access to water? Is there a shower? They were taken to stay in classrooms, 4 people in a class, to sleep on a mattress on the floor. Passengers were stuck at the airport for more than 11 hours. And there, they've reported about 10 cases. The first issue is whether the coronavirus will infect the continent. That has been answered. We know that coronavirus is exponential, non-linear, multiplicative, and we know what exponential disease propagation looks like in the real world. Real world exponential growth looks like nothing, 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 then cluster, 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 then boom. 27th of January, I said I have to assume that the coronavirus is already in Africa, but just not diagnosed. That's a racing certainty. Fearing coronavirus, African city dwellers flee to the countryside each morning at a crowded bus station east of Nairobi. Kenyans load their bags onto minibuses emblazoned with the faces of pop stars and Jesus, heading to their villages in the hope of escaping the coronavirus. I'm going back home because of corona, said Amina Baraza, her yellow headscarf standing out in the dark bus. The electronic shop where she worked had shut, she said, and she was going to stay with her family away from the city crowds. There you just stay in your compound where your movements are very limited. Here in the city you brush shoulders with so many people. Travellers in other African cities from Nairobi to Kampala, Johannesburg and Rabat are also heading to the countryside, worrying officials who say this helps spread diseases like Ebola in other outbreaks. You're going to kill your grandmother, he told a news conference this week. You're transporting disease, and if people die, you will carry that cross for the rest of your life. The countryside is full of people who found themselves unemployed due to coronavirus, Agram said. In the countryside, life is cheap and people help each other. I think it's a perfectly rational decision. As I've said before, Bole and Addis is the epicenter of China-Africa connectedness and much more. This disease, when it comes to Africa, will be more dramatic than in China, and I don't want to play down what is happening in China. Bill Gates. Kinshasa, a city of 10 to 20 million people, is going on a 3-week lockdown rotation from this Saturday. This is a photo I took of Kinshasa, where more than 20 million people live, cheek by jowl. Therefore, we're past the point of no return, in my view, and Gladwell's tipping point in an epidemic when a virus reaches critical mass, the boiling point, the moment on the graph when the line starts to shoot straight upwards. South Africa is accelerating. Latest caseload is over 927. And remember that the rate of exponential growth is around 33% a day. Viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. I wrote about debt, virus, and locusts creating a perfect storm for Africa. The Economist, more than half of African countries are above the IMF's recommended limit for debt. That was the debt part. World Bank says that 29 out of 47 African countries need to tax more than they spend just to keep their debt constant as a share of the economy. Economist again, Africa is woefully ill-equipped to cope with COVID-19. People cannot stay away from work if they have no money. That's why we're going to be an experiment in herd immunity. We are looking in the rearview mirror because our statistics are not accurate. Citi has been appointed by African Development Bank to help tap markets with a bond to finance governments and companies fighting coronavirus in Africa for the African Development Bank. 3-year bond. Size and coupon have not yet been decided. South African All Shares down 21.09% this year. Dollar rand 17.345. Egyptian pound is the world's strongest currency this year after Myanmar's and has gained 2.1% versus the dollar. EGX 30 is down 29% year to date. Nigerian All Shares down 18.94% year to date. That's going to be another epicenter of this disease. By mid-February, Ghana's cedi was the world's best performing currency in 2020, up more than 7% against the dollar. It's now reversed all those gains and dipped close to its weakest level on record. That's from Rich Frontiers. Ghana Stock Exchange is down 4.26% year to date. Kenya announced the first corona death yesterday, And essentially, if you go back to that analysis done by Thomas Puyo, that means 17 days it took this person to die from the time of infection. Cases had to multiply. He's got an equation. That means if you're not diagnosing all cases, one death today means 800 true cases. That's assuming that is the only death. And currently the numbers are showing 25 or something. So he's talking about something in the States, the death rate was through the roof. At some point the state had 3 cases and 1 death. We know from other places that the death rate of the coronavirus is anything between 0.5% and 5%. It turned out that the virus had been spreading undetected for weeks. It's not like there were only 3 cases. It's that authorities only knew about 3, and one of them was dead because the more serious the condition, the more likely somebody is to be tested. This is an issue. You only know the official cases, not the true ones. That's why I said you're looking through the rearview mirror, but you need to know the true ones. How can you estimate the true ones? It turns out there's a couple of ways, and I have a model for both so you can play with the numbers. We know approximately how long it takes for that person to go from catching the virus to dying, on average 17.3 days. That means the person, and he's looking at Washington State, but you can look at this Kenyan case and go back 17.3 days. Then you know the mortality rate. For this scenario, I'm using 1%. That means around, on his dates, there were already around 100 cases in the area, of only one of which ended up in death 17.3 days later. Now use the average doubling time for the coronavirus. Time it takes to double cases on average 6.2. That means in the 17 days it took this person to die, the cases had to multiply by 8, and he's got the equation there. That means if you're not diagnosing all cases, 1 death today means 800 true cases today. That's why I said we're looking in the rearview mirror. Lancet Labs is offering COVID-19 testing. Just drive to the lab, swabs taken as you sit in your car. That's pretty amazing. The Shilling has strengthened to 105.20. The Nairobi All Share is down 24.83%. And the NSE20 is down 28.75%. And I wish you a great weekend.